We're back with the Always Ready preview. This week, always ready to trust in God's sovereignty. Welcome back, discipleship friends. This week we are in Unit 23. We're looking at Acts chapter 27, verses 13 through 44, and we're going to be talking about what it means to fully rely and trust in God's sovereignty. What do we mean by God's sovereign nature? That He is a sovereign God. We're going to think about that. We're going to see the application of the passage, that Paul gives us a great example of how we do that, how we're ready to trust in that. And then I also think that this week we're looking at both sides of that gospel coin, the evangelism coin, the side of disciple making and being equipped, and then the side of actually sharing the gospel. And that when we talk about sovereignty, that our reliance and faith, as we grow in that, we are actually maturing in our sanctification. That is both a result of the faith and the trust, is greater maturity, and it also just sort of walks hand in hand. And then when we talk about the evangelism side, knowing that the fulfillment of salvation that God has for His people and His world, those plans will not be denied. They will occur in His timing that is perfect. And so there's a great freedom as we trust in that responsibility being taken off our shoulders for the conviction, although the responsibility being put on our shoulders for the obeying to share. And so God will change hearts for whom He has desired and willed and knows, and nothing can change that, and it will happen His timing. And so that's really a matter of His sovereignty, and we'll talk a little bit more about that and some other passages and verses that might help us. And so we have some great secondary sources as well this week. But ultimately, Paul will say, I have great faith it will happen exactly as God told me it will happen, because He told me it would happen, as God would say. And we also would say the same thing. When we talk about the redemptive story of God, His plan to restore us out of separation in the garden into presence in the new garden and everything in between, we can have great faith that it will happen exactly as He has said it would happen. And so that's where we see this connection with Paul today. And so it's a great passage. Let's go ahead and get into it and look at the questions. All right, question number one, just really a thought-provoking question. When was the last time you said or you heard someone say, it's okay, God is in control? God is in control. Maybe you've seen the bumper sticker, seen the t-shirt. What did you mean by that? What do you think was meant by that? And have you ever used it when you didn't really mean it? And again, this isn't a pointing fingers thing. I just want us to reflect on the idea of when we truly say God is in control, are we truly meaning He is fully sovereign? We totally mean that. And so He's either sovereign or He's not. And so we're going to be building on that today, but maybe that's an icebreaker, just that phrase. And then the second question is sort of like that, is when you say God is in control and you think about God being a sovereign God, what are the implications of that if you fully trust and rely in that? If you are someone right now who can with great confidence just anchor in the idea that God is sovereign. He has always been and will always be all-knowing, all-present, all-seeing, all-control. If you fully believe that and have faith in that, what have been the implications of that? What are the outworkings of that? Some of the things that came to mind for me were just a greater sense of peace, perhaps greater joy, a deeper relationship with God, perspective that's eternal. I think that grows with our understanding of sovereignty. And so those might be some of the things, but think about that. And then question 3, we start getting into the passage and seeing what's going on. And really, quite honestly, 3, 4, and 5 are kind of go together. You're just going to flow from one to the other. But before we look at the question specific, let's understand where we are. If you recall in Acts chapter 26, when we last left Paul in this series of courtroom dramas, Paul was standing before King Agrippa and Governor Festus in Caesarea. He had presented his case, shared the gospel, shared his testimony, and what we find at the end of chapter 26 is that Festus and Agrippa walk out of the room, and they say, when they had withdrawn, they said to one another, "This man has done nothing to deserve death or imprisonment. And Agrippa says to Festus, this man could have been set free if he had not appealed to Caesar. And so Paul, again, doesn't see his chains as being held captive. He sees them as being the fulfillment of God's plan. When he was told that he would take the gospel to Rome, that he would share it before kings, he would be in front of Caesar, he sees his imprisonment and his appeal to be seen before Caesar as yet further evidence of the opportunity to share the gospel and just be part of God's plan. It's amazing. We think of personal freedoms, and to Paul, that was a personal freedom, that God was granting him that even in his chains. And so chapter 27 begins, and this is just this epic voyage of Paul across the seas and the oceans heading for Italy, and all of the calamities and the shipwrecks and everything that comes with it is what we're going to see in Acts chapter 27. And our lesson today is at the middle of this storm. If you read the first verses, the first 12 verses, they sound like something out of a captain's log. For any of you seagoers, I don't know what you call, ocean goers. If you enjoy boats and captaining and all that goes along with ports and terminology to sails and jibs and gibs and whatever else is involved, those first 12 verses you'll love. They're very technical, they're very nautical, and so take a look and you'll see they set sail, they faced some winds, they had to head in, duck in, they took down a sail, they lowered a boat, and they get to this point where winter's coming. And the winter storm season is impassable across these waters. And so they've got to find a place to take land for the winter. And this is a big boat. I think we see later, I forget now, it was like 189. It'll be in our text. It's a couple hundred passengers on this boat. Sailors, these centurions, Paul, as we saw, and his friends. Verse 1 of 27 says, it was decided that we should set sail for Italy. So Luke is with Paul. So he's also got his friends around him, even though he's technically imprisoned. It says that the head guy, Julius, will allow Paul freedom to be with his friends. So we just sort of see this trip taking out. And so questions 3, 4, and 5, beginning with 3, ask us to look at the verses specifically in 21 through 26. Of chapter 27. Let's look at that, and then we'll put some other references up there that help answer this question. But the passage says, since they had been without food for a long time, Paul stood up among them and said, men, you should have listened to me and not have set sail from Crete and incurred this injury and loss. Yet now I urge you to take heart, for there will be no loss of life among you, but only of the ship. For this very night there stood before me an angel of the God to whom I belong and whom I worship. And he said, do not be afraid, Paul. You must stand before Caesar. And behold, God has granted you all those who sail with you. So take heart, men, for I have faith in God that it will be exactly as I have been told. He has faith. They're facing this huge, huge storm, and he's given directions of what they should and shouldn't do. And we'll see that he even acted into this, though. And this really gets at the heart of some of these questions. Question 3 says, use that passage along with several others, you see them on your screen right there, to formulate a short response to this following prompt. The biblical definition for the sovereignty of God is ... What is the biblical definition for the sovereignty of God? We might find things like God is all-knowing, he's in total control, he works all things out according to his purposes. Those come from these passages as well. And of course, that then might lead into a conversation of question 4, that says, well, if God is fully sovereign, like you've answered in question 3, if those attributes are truly true, then what is the responsibility of individuals? How do you explain human freedom within the lens of God is in control? Part of it is really understanding the idea that in God's sovereignty, he has also granted us that opportunity to be obedient or disobedient. And yet ultimately, even in our disobedience, which is not aligned with how he would will that we be, his plan is not going to be denied. And so this QR code, which is question 5, again, maybe I put these in the wrong order. I think it would have been good to maybe listen to this before, because he also talks about Acts 27. This is Ligon Duncan. And so it's an interesting understanding of our responsibility, even beyond choices, our responsibility. And those responsibilities are obedience, to follow as Christ would have us follow. And that when we are irresponsible, then we're not following as he would have follow, but there's nothing we can do to stop his plans. We are just out of line with his will. And the main issue here is that God will still see his plan through, and yet we miss the blessing of being part of that. We miss the blessing of growing in relationship with him. We miss the blessing of being used in the process of salvation for someone. God is still going to see that person is fulfilled in his plan of salvation, and yet our disobedience, our irresponsibility, our choice, if you will, removes us from that. And so I think that's, some of this is sort of God's ways are not our ways. And so trying to understand that fully is difficult. And yet we can still understand that God is in total control. His ultimate plan for us, that eternal perspective for us, will not change. He will not lose us. And yet we still have been granted in that sovereignty a great freedom to love him out of obedience or disobedience. And that's where he allows us to live out our faith. When God is in control, we can really rely on the idea that his plan from Genesis to Revelation, that redemptive, restorative, redemptive plan, is what he is in full control of it. And we have seen it throughout history. We will see it from history forward until he concludes that plan exactly as he has foretold, and exactly to his timing, and exactly as he desires. And that's really the big picture of God's sovereignty. So a lot to think about there, but that's really kind of what we're getting at this week as well. God is sovereign, and we're not robots. So kind of talk that out. What does that mean in our study, and what are these passages telling us? Which, in fact, as we look through the passages, what we should always be doing is, what is the attribute of God that it's telling us about? And then what's our response to it? And so these passages are designed to tell us that God is sovereign. He's in control of all things. And so our response to his attribute then is to trust that, to rely on that. Even when it's something we don't understand, just to have faith in that, and continue to grasp and know that he is a good God, and that his eternal plans are good plans. And so that's where we rest in that. Question 6 gets us to multiply, and of course the way we truly can walk in God's will, we can fulfill our responsibilities before God, that we can honor his sovereignty and try to be as directly aligned with his will in obedience as we can, is by walking closely with the Holy Spirit who indwells us as the living God, and allows us to live freely and confidently in God's plan. And so this week in Multiply, we're looking at the Spirit of God. And page 279, the question is going to be question 6. And question 6 just basically asks us, have you seen the Spirit of God at work in your life, or in the life of your church? Wow. Our desire, our heart is yes and yes. And yet we should always be asking that. We should always be asking, am I walking close enough by and with the Holy Spirit, being led, being directed, that I see evidence of that in my life? Do I see a greater faith in God's control and his plan, which would be walking close to the Spirit? Do I see evidence in the church? Evidence of the Spirit at work in the church is a greater sanctification of the brothers and sisters of the church, a greater fellowship in the church, a unity of the church, an outreach of the church, a mission of the church, others coming to Christ in the church, the Spirit alive and working in the church, greater worship. not more, but richer worship. So look at that, and again, make sure this is taking us through this, again, these key theological, doctrinal, redemptive plan in order, in such short little segments that are so key, so key. So take a look at those 10 pages this week and multiply, and I think you'll really appreciate that. Lastly, put into action. So a key note for our small groups out there, our put into action this day was really talking about Share the Hope Day. Well, these were printed. Our schedule of group meetings got shifted. And so Share the Hope Day is not this Saturday. It's the following Saturday. It's May 10th. So still use this page as an opportunity to prepare. We could use volunteers. We're going to be sharing the 3 circles. We're going to be having a brief gospel message hayride. We're going to be available and present and hospitable and loving. We're going to hopefully share the gospel. We're going to enjoy great fellowship. And so we just want to share the hope. Talk about that. That's May 10th. And then lastly, your personal testimony. Really, see if there's anyone who would like to share their personal testimony as framed by the idea of before Christ, how I came to receive Christ, and after Christ. That 3 to 4 minutes, and you might find that this has been a great exercise in not just practicing our testimony among friends, but of learning and growing closer among others in your small group. There might be testimonies that are an encouragement to you and uplifting, that you've been sitting next to somebody for a few years and had no idea. And so I would encourage you these last 3 weeks, invite others in your small group to share their personal testimony. Well, that's it, friends. I hope you have a wonderful week. I hope we continue to just rest in the assurance of God's sovereign nature, and that as Paul had written to the church in Colossae, when he said about Jesus Christ in a very similar way, that Jesus, in all things, were created through him and for him, that he was before all things, and that he holds all things together. It is even more evident by the fact that he, Jesus Christ, lives. Blessings, friends.